Welcome to YogiViews, where my guest is yoga itself, through interviewing those who practice it, teach it, sell it, or simply love it. I am Antonio Sausys. Depression is a common mental condition that affects millions of people either as a minor temporary episode or as a more permanent personality trait. When it comes to treatment, medication seems to be the most prevalent modality. Yet, there are some practitioners applying other complementary techniques in search of valid alternatives. This is the case of Amy Weintraub, whom I had the opportunity to interview in Austin, Texas, where she was presenting at the Symposium on Yoga Therapy and Research. Amy Weintraub is the director of the LifeForce Yoga Healing Institute and author of the best-selling Yoga for Depression and the groundbreaking Yoga Skills for Therapists. She has been pioneer in the field of yoga and mental health for more than 20 years and is involved in ongoing research on the effects of yoga on mood. Her LifeForce Yoga protocol is being used in residential treatment centers, hospitals, and by healthcare providers throughout the world. I asked Amy several questions. My first one was, what was her first experience with yoga?
Well, I met meditation before I met yoga with transcendental meditation, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. But I suffered from depression, and even the meditation didn't really touch that deep level of grief, depression, the chronic grief in the tissues that I carried with me. And it wasn't until I went to Kripalu Yoga Center for the first time in 1988 and began an embodied practice that was so much about, that included pranayama. So it wasn't just asana, it was pranayama. It included movement. It included meditation, which for me at that point with an anxiety-based depression was very challenging for me. That I began to feel better. And I had been on antidepressants for many years and in psychotherapy. And when I began a daily yoga practice, because I took home at that time videotapes and audio tapes from Kripalu, there were no yoga teachers in my town where I lived on the East Coast, and I started doing a daily practice, I just started feeling better and better. So eventually, after 8 or 9 months, I was able, with the supervision of a psychiatrist and with titrating, doing a daily practice, not just a once a week or once every 3 times a week, but a daily practice of yoga. I was able to slowly titrate off medication, and that was in 1989, and I haven't been on medication since. So I managed my mood with my practice, and I became passionate about sharing what had transformed my life, what had saved my life, because there had been a suicide attempt. I would not be here speaking with you, Antonio, if yoga hadn't saved my life. And I wouldn't have written a book called Yoga for Depression, So for me, that depression and the early wounds were part of what brings me here today, what keeps me going, because it was through those, what Rumi says, something like the bandaged places is where the light shines through. So I'm very grateful for the rocky road that I was on for so many years. And so that was my first encounter, and it transformed me. I loved the practice. I loved it. And I became passionate, and I became a yoga teacher in '92, and I just became passionate about sharing what had transformed my life with other people. And then I had been a writer, and I still am a writer, so I started writing articles about yoga for depression. I started collaborating with researchers on ways in which yoga had could support and mental health, and just little by little, there was no business plan or anything like that. It's just organically, out of my passion for supporting others through the healing process I've been through, having been through the medical model, and having been through psychotherapy, which, certainly helps us understand our issues I think they go hand in hand, really, in so many types. It's not that in the last 25 years I haven't done little stints of psychotherapy when I needed. I think they're complementary, but often the drugs that we're prescribed as psychopharmacological agents blunt the affect, so we're not really feeling our feelings. I feel when I started practicing yoga, I cried more, but it was more, I was feeling my feelings, and I would look down on myself and say, Amy, what a big heart you have. It was like I was able to witness the tears. What a big heart you have, because when I was depressed, I was numb. There were no feelings.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Now, yes, out of your passion, but I would also say out of the need, because there's a reason why your program and your initiative has been that well received, because there's a real need out there. Depression is a big problem.
Yes, depression, anxiety, trauma, and when I first started teaching, when my book came out in 2004, my first book, Yoga for Depression, and I started teaching yoga workshops for depression prior to that, but I became more well known for it after the book was published, of course. And in that time, people would come, especially on the East Coast in the wintertime when I was teaching at Kapalo, they would be just like no affect. They would be so over-medicated. And I remember a 17-year-old coming up to me at a book signing and saying, do you think I can get off medication? Do you think yoga will help me? And I said, I'm sure, with the support and, practicing. And I said, so how long have you been on medication? Since I was 11. So she had been, all that normative growth and emotional, hormonal responsiveness to life had been delayed for her. So she was going to, so that's what I was seeing was the depression. Now, I'm seeing much more anxiety-based depression, much more anxiety, and I think it's the worries that we carry for the world, not just our individual and our emotional milieu of our families and our friends and our own mental health, but we carry the burden of what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
The trauma in the world. And I'm seeing a lot more anxiety, but the interesting thing is that 80% of the time, anxiety and depression are commingled. Yeah. So if you have insomnia and you can't sleep and you're anxious, it's eventually going to throw you into a depression. And before there were medications to treat anxiety and depression, it was just melancholia. It was just two sides of the same coin. So when we develop our yoga practices, as we do in LifeForce Yoga, to meet anxiety and depression, they're often the same practices, but they're sequenced differently to meet the mood and then bring it into a calmer state, to bring the whole system into balance. So it's not just about the mood, it's about clearing the space. Because we are, the thing about the gift that you and I have as yoga teachers, the gift to ourselves, is that we can, even in those moments of grief that you know so well and have written about so beautifully, even in those moments of moods that we all have, we know that we're so much more than our moods. Because we have a practice that clears the space every day. We have those moments of connection with who we really are, that our own true nature, so much bigger than whatever label has been put on us, if we have a diagnostic category label, or so much bigger than the story we're telling ourselves or the world is telling us about what's wrong with us. We have these glimpses, and then to be able to offer that to our students, that yes, the grief is there, yes, the trauma history might be there, yes, the depression, the anxiety, but you are so much more than that. and those practices that we do, whether it's a pranayama or mudra, it gives access to that bigger place of wholeness that resides in all of us, that inner healer.
You're naming connection, you're naming awareness, you're naming expansion of awareness. And of course there are a number of treatments for depression. So what, in your opinion, is the value of yoga? What is it that yoga brings to the table so depressed people can overcome their situation?
Well, a number of things, Antonio. First of all, the breath itself, the focus on the breath. So it's not just the stretching and the asanas, but when we're depressed in particular, there's often a body posture that goes along with that, and there's a compression of the diaphragm. We're not getting enough breath in through the system. So there's a flattening effect in the solar plexus. We're not getting enough oxygenated blood to the brain and through the whole body. We're not getting, so yoga practices on a physiological level begin to deepen the breath. We're getting more oxygen to the brain. There are a number of studies that show that that certain breathing patterns, like a 4-4 count breath, actually diminishes depression on psycho-emotional scales. And we're doing practices that when we get a cue to sensation after we do them, let's say we did a pranayama that involved our arms, and then a breathing practice, and then we sensed into hands, arms, shoulders. In that moment of cueing to sensation, we are out of the story in our minds. We're into a sense of presence. And it's a window through whatever mood state is visiting. So yoga, as opposed to just ordinary exercise, gives us these moments of connection. Moments of connection to self, where we're whole and healed no matter what has happened to us. Gives us a sense of connection to others. Oxytocin and prolactin are raised, so we have that bonding feeling that mothers have with their children. Because you know how many people hug you after yoga class, because their oxytocin and prolactin are raised. We're also stimulating, certain practice stimulate the vagus nerve, which stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which deactivates the overfiring, hyper-aroused limbic brain. So there's a new study that actually shows that we know, for example, that trauma shrinks the hippocampus, which is responsible for linear memory, which is why people have flashbacks in trauma. And it enlarges the poor little amygdala in the limbic brain. It's overfiring. And there's a new study that shows that yoga does the opposite. It will enlarge the hippocampus, so then memory improves, and it will shrink that overstimulated amygdala that's hyper-aroused and is triggered by so many things that remind the individual of something that has happened that has been challenging for them. So there's those aspects. You can exercise and you can feel better. I mean, I love to dance.
Yes, everybody, yes.
Yeah, I love to dance. I can go to a Zumba class, I come out smiling, it feels good. But yoga adds that dimension of awareness, that we can shift our mood in some of the things we love to do, ride a bike, go running, that's great. But yoga adds that dimension of awareness, and it adds the breath. It adds that awareness that we have so much more room inside for who we really are to shine through. It allows more space for our authentic being to begin to radiate. What depression is constriction. It's tamping down. It's that constriction of who we really are. So it frees the space. And we can have momentary feel-good effect from Zumba class.
But it won't be lasting.
It won't be the lasting, sustained effect that we have, that sense I am more than this mood that's visiting me.
Yeah. Amy, now, in terms of the students or the practitioners or the clients, we know that one of the symptoms of depression is an apathy, is a difficulty in taking steps toward recovery. And you're mentioning practices that either need you to move your body or focus on your breath. So how do you overcome this?
Great question. Because I say, meet the person where they are. So if someone is lethargic and can't get off the couch to turn off, change the channel when the remote dies, they're not going to get out of bed and start doing sun salutations.
No.
So I say, start in bed. And I actually, my first, when I teach during the LifeForce Yoga practitioner training, the first early morning practice that we do is for meeting the tamasic mood or the depressed mood. It starts in a supine position. And it gradually, with breath and movement, begins to build the energy. So that can be done, that can start in bed. I also do this funny thing where I say to people, you know, you have to get out of bed to pee in the morning, right?
I know.
Yeah.
I understand.
Right.
I use that example. That's
Right.
Yes.
So on your way back to
And
bed.
you do.
Yeah,
You
right.
do.
Instead, if you could just commit to 3 rounds of breath of joy, and just 3, you know, that's all you have to do, and then you can get right back into bed. They're either not going to get in bed because the energy's flowing, the prana's flowing, or they'll get in bed, but the mind will be clearer. They'll begin to plan their day. They won't be in that sluggish place. So it's really meeting the mood where it is, not expecting. And that's why, you know, I think yoga works so much better than exercise, because everybody knows that they should go exercise. They should put on their running shoes and go out and take a runner. They should go to the gym. But if you're depressed, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But if you're given a practice where you can stay in bed, you're more likely to comply with that than you are putting your sneakers on and, you know, going off in public to some place. Maybe you're carrying too much weight and you feel uncomfortable with the weight on your body, or you feel that you're not in shape and you don't want to be seen, and you know, you've got all these stories in your head. So start in bed.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's wonderful. I think that one of the reasons why a lot of yoga therapists might fail in the practicality of their practice is because they know that a vigorous practice can help people, and so this is what they would ask their students, and they wouldn't do it. So, you have done a lot, or you have deepened the research in regards to your particular techniques, and. On the other hand, we hear that yoga therapy is not necessarily in this moment prescribed by doctors. But at the same time, much as it happens with chronic pain, there is a huge need for finding avenues because the standard therapeutic procedures are not working. So, have you found that thanks to your research studies, something has changed, or
Well, I don't know whether it's because of, I mean, I have actually done been, you know, an author of a couple of studies, and am a consultant for NIH for another big, not NIH, Brown and Butler Hospital for an NIH-funded study on yoga for depression. But I don't know what the reasoning is why. I mean, I know I wrote the first book on yoga and mental health, Yoga for Depression, but from the time I started to today, there's been a sea change. I know in our training program, we have more mental health professionals, or I'd say an equal number of mental health professionals and yoga teachers. Sometimes more mental health, sometimes, you know, but it's at least equal. They're hungry for ways in which they can naturally, without relying on medication or as an adjunct to medication, help their patients and their clients begin to self-regulate, begin to develop more self-compassion, and they find, so they're really hungry for these. I think one of the factors, the research has been great. I mean, that's letting the public know. So now the public is saying, well, I think I'll try yoga because I've read, I read this article in the newspaper that the study just came out and showed that GABA levels were increased, which, and they weren't increased with exercise, but they were increased with yoga. And that means that that's really good for depression. And I've read this other article, so maybe I'll try it. I'll give it a try. So more people are trying it. Younger doctors have tried it in medical school, or their spouse or somebody in their family has benefited from yoga. So more and more people are becoming aware of it. I think there's a really, and you're talking about cutting healthcare costs. Yoga is such a preventative, and the kinds of things like diabetes and coronary issues, and certainly in depression and anxiety, lots of good research now. The other thing, personally, back when my book first came out in 2004, I started teaching at some mental health conferences. And I think, so people in the mental health world got to know who I was, and then they began to think about yoga as an adjunct, and so they became more and more. They didn't necessarily study with me, some did, but they may have gone to their local communities. Some of them became 200-hour. I'm seeing a lot more people who are mental health professionals becoming yoga teachers.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, talking about this, we know that what we do is called yoga therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not psychotherapy with a few yoga poses,
Mm-hmm.
just as it's not physical therapy with a few yoga poses.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that defines our field is the integration of mind, body, and spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Do you bring in the spirit?
That's where we start.
Mm-hmm.
We start from that place. There is no time when I work with an individual or a group that we don't start with self-compassion and clearing the space for whatever their spirituality, whether it's, they call it prana, Christ Jesus, Hashem, to flow, Allah, to flow through. It's about removing the constrictions so that the energy of the universe, that energy that connects us all, flows through. So it's very different than rolling out a mat and doing a vinyasa flow, just chanting and doing Series A, sun, Series B, sun salutation. It's about creating a safe and sacred container. So whether I'm working with one person or a group or a training or presenting at a conference of doctors, we're going to do, because we're talking about emotion, it's going to stir everybody in the room at some point. Somebody's going to be touched, even if they're the professional. They're going to bring their hearts to in the room with them. Or they think, when I ask how many people who are yoga practitioners have cried on the yoga mat, everybody raises their hand. Yeah. And so the people who don't, if they don't, then they're thinking, my gosh, this is what and they're, by the end of that weekend or however, the tears are rolling down their face. And it's not, when we cry on the yoga mat, it's not about the story most of the time. It's a release. It's a letting go, like we would on so it's definitely a clearing practice, and that is based in the spiritual awareness that we are so much more than these physical bodies, so much more than our stories, that so much more than the labels or the costumes we put on. And the yoga gives us access to that moreness, that spaciousness, that awareness.
Yeah. Every time something becomes really popular and globalized in the world, is obviously addressing a need or some sort of issue that is precisely global. Yoga has reached amazing level of popularity, and even though it's been there for thousands of years, now it's known everywhere, a lot of people practice it. What need of the world do you think that yoga is addressing, and why it became so popular?
That's a really interesting question that I haven't even really thought about, because I think about the need for, I guess what yoga to me brings is a sense of balance. And when there's imbalance, yoga has the ability to help us come back into balance. So if the world is out of balance, you know, if there seems to be a global movement towards a more spiritual form of exercise, then it may be the need is the imbalance in, you know, our environment.
Yeah, we are living in a pretty imbalanced
Yeah.
world.
Yeah, it's gotten faster and faster, and what was it, just something I heard yesterday, that reading cover to cover one issue of the New York Times is more knowledge than most individuals had 100 years ago.
Yeah.
We were just dealing with so much information and so much technology.
Yeah, and at the same time we also heard yesterday that sitting all day is equal to smoking.
Right? And then pushing
So-
buttons.
Yeah.
You know, we were biologically programmed to use our hands, to hunt and to gather and to reach into the soil. And unless you're a gardener or unless you're a potter, you're not using your hands. You're pushing buttons. And that's why I think the yoga mudras can be so effective, because we're activating areas of the brain, we're moving the energy through the physical system with something as subtle as hand gestures.
Yeah. Well, Amy, I know that we could talk for a few more hours, and I look forward, regardless of this wonderful opportunity we had, to bring you to the studio sometime. And I thank you for your work, and I feel that I thank you on the side of the yoga therapist for what you bring to the table, but I'm sure that I'm also, in a way, thanking you for all those human beings out there that, while depressed and desperate and not really envisioning anything good in their lives, they can be touched by your program and be helped.
My guest today was Amy Weintraub. She is director of the LifeForce Yoga Healing Institute and author of the best-selling Yoga for Depression and the groundbreaking Yoga Skills for Therapists. She has been a pioneer in the field of yoga and mental health for over 20 years and is involved in ongoing research on the effects of yoga on mood. Her LifeForce Yoga protocol is being used in residential treatment centers, hospitals, and by healthcare providers throughout the world. I hope you like our show today. And if you care to let me know, shoot me an email at antonio@yogiviews.com. I look forward to seeing you the next time